What do you think of when I say the word breakfast? You're probably thinking eggs and bacon, maybe pancakes or waffles, maybe cereal, donut, coffee. Those are all the things you're thinking of, right? But in the 18th century, breakfast was nothing like what we think of as a modern breakfast. Those are way beyond what breakfast would be. The concept of breakfast in the 18th century is very different, especially for the working man. Yes, the occasional person in the 18th century did have eggs and bacon for breakfast, but usually that was in a social setting. If you had guests over and you were eating all together for breakfast, then it was a special meal. And yes, you would bring all those special things out, but the working man is not in that situation. He just wants to get his stomach full to get him through the morning until he gets to lunch. And so the breakfasts were all set around that concept. And we can see those references over and over if we look at the books and the writings in the 18th century. Whether it's a workhouse menu for the breakfast or a working man's menu where he's talking about what he's going to need to get the day going. Those are all very, very similar. They always have things like bread and cheese, maybe beer. Oatmeal is probably the one that shows up the vast majority of the time. It might be called one thing or the other, but in our parlance today, we're gonna just call it oatmeal. They might call it milk porridge or pottage or all these great names for it, but it's just oatmeal. Here's a menu from a book that's about hospitals, prisons, and workhouses. What's for breakfast? On Sunday, breakfast is 4 ounces each of bread and beer, sufficient, not exceeding a pint each. On Monday, breakfast was 1 pint of beef or mutton broth, well thickened with oatmeal, and 4 ounces of bread. Tuesday is 4 ounces of bread and a pint of milk pottage. Again, just basically milk oatmeal. Here's the diet for prisoners of war in a Liverpool hospital. The low diet is water gruel or panada, which is made with breadcrumbs and milk, rice gruel, milk pottage or broth, 8 ounces of bread, butter, and for a drink, toast and water. In an 18th century book called The Farmer's Tour, they talk about a farmer's breakfast. Monday, he's gonna have beef broth. On Wednesday, beef broth. Breakfast for a Thursday is just milk in the summer and milk broth in the wintertime. William Ellis talks about farm workers in the 18th century. He says, the men generally eat 5 times a day. At their first setting out, they eat a little bread and cheese or apple pie with a draught of small beer or half a pint of strong beer per man. At 8 o'clock in the morning, some send for breakfast. Boiled milk crumbled with bread, others milk porridge with bread, others posset with bread or bread and cheese. So far we've covered working men, maybe people in prisons or hospitals or workhouses, those kinds of settings. But what about rich people in the 18th century? What are they eating for breakfast? Now we do have social settings where they talk about these amazing breakfasts with all these eggs and bacon and all that good stuff. But most of the time, they're just eating a simple meal, and a great example is William Byrd III's diary in the early 18th century. He's in Virginia, and he talks about having breakfast, and almost always it is simply boiled milk. That's what he says. Now, he might just mean milk warmed up, like a milk broth, or he might actually mean a milk porridge or milk pottage along basically oatmeal again. Here we have the breakfast of the late Duke of Bridgewater, an abstemious man, but his breakfast was a mess of water gruel. A very, very simple breakfast. Benjamin Franklin's autobiography also mentioned this classic breakfast of bread, cheese, and beer. And you say, well, now why do you have a breakfast of bread, cheese, and beer? Well, most of us don't want to spend a lot of time cooking for breakfast, and that's exactly what's going on in the 18th century. Most of these breakfasts don't take very much time. Even the oatmeal is called hasty pudding because it's a pudding that only takes a few minutes to make. And in the case of bread and cheese, well, you just need to slice them and drink them down with your beer, and your breakfast is done. As we continue to dig into the research of the 18th century, we will find the occasional very strange breakfast. And here's one that references drinking mulled wine and cakes, probably to get over a night of revelry. Sometimes when we're researching, we'll find some of the most interesting things in very kind of odd places. There's a book from the 18th century that has to do with helping people understand French and English. So if you're trying to learn French, and it's a book that's written with French on one side, English on the other, and it has a dialogue going on. And here's a dialogue about breakfast. Will you have breakfast? Is it time for breakfast? What will you have for breakfast? Bread and butter? Milk porridge? Water gruel? All that is children's meat. Bring us something else. There are sausages and petty pates. Shall I bring a gammon of bacon? Yes, bring it. We shall cut a slice of it. Lay it on a napkin on that table and give us plates and knives and forks. Notice I didn't have any spoons. You promised me fried eggs and bacon. Here are some. Eat new-laid eggs. Here are some soft eggs in the shell. This is a rotten egg. So an egg be but fresh, I care not whether it be soft or hard. There are many books in the 18th century describing the plight of the poor or trying to help them out, giving them recipes. And here's a recipe for oatmeal that tries to go above and beyond, but still be very, very inexpensive. It's called savory water gruel. That sounds good just right there, doesn't it? You take some water and oatmeal, and then you shred in onions or leeks. And that's going to give you this new kind of flavor so you don't get burnt out on that same oatmeal flavor over and over. Imagine this dish that might be called milk pottage or milk porridge. It might be called gruel or water gruel or even hasty pudding. They're all basically the same thing, and today we would call it oatmeal. Here's the description that's in one of the 18th century texts. It says, hasty pudding is made by putting oatmeal gradually into boiling water and stirring it about with a peeled stick and letting it continue to boil in that thickened state until sufficiently enough. When it is taken off the fire, it is poured out into pans, into pots or dishes to cool and then eaten with butter or more commonly with skimmed milk. It is an agreeable, nutritive, and healthy food and is generally breakfast and supper for the laboring people in the northern parts. Let's make up a dish of this porridge or hasty pudding so we can try out the 18th century breakfast. We're going to take our water and start to get it to boil. Now, some of these recipes are a little bit different. They use a mix of 50-50 milk and water. But we get that boiling or just to boil, and then we slowly stir in our oatmeal, or in some cases we might use a different kind of grain. We could use flour or even cornmeal if we were in North America. But we slowly stir that in and it will start to really get a bubble and boil. We might need to turn down the heat a little bit and it'll start to thicken and thicken. And when it gets to about the thickness you like, we're gonna take it off the fire. We may even take it off the fire just a little bit earlier than that because it'll continue to absorb those liquids in there and get thicker and thicker as it goes. When we think about breakfast, we're thinking about eggs and bacon. Maybe we're thinking about pancakes and toast, but this is the breakfast of the vast majority of people in the 18th century, and that's it. They're having this, whether they're workmen, maybe they're sailors and this is their breakfast. Even rich people in the 18th century, many of them were eating just this for breakfast. It couldn't get simpler. It's just oatmeal boiled in a little bit of water, maybe with milk, and put that butter on top. And if you really need to, you can add some brown sugar, but just like this. Let's see what it's like. It is really, really good oatmeal and makes a great breakfast, whether it's today or 300 years ago.